Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Last night, Treasurer Jim Chalmers delivered his fourth federal budget, a budget the government hadn't really intended to deliver until ex-Tropical Cyclone Alfred delayed plans to call an election. It was a budget very light on reform, with the biggest surprise being fairly small tax cuts for all taxpayers over the next couple of years. It also confirmed a decade of deficits ahead, but a better than expected outlook for economic growth. As the Treasurer claimed in Parliament House last night, Australia's economy is turning a corner, just as the global economy is deteriorating. Every year we get the best budget analysis from Fear and Greed's resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, aka the Kouk. You'll hear him every Monday on our podcast, The Week Ahead. He's the Managing Director of Market Economics and a former economic advisor to a Prime Minister. Stephen, welcome to Fear and Greed, which is a bit ridiculous saying that to you, Stephen, because you're just part of the furniture.
Yeah, indeed, but good to be here and good to sort of have a bit of a chat about the budget, because it was a document that sort of didn't set the world on fire, but it was one of those ones where if you sort of sit back and just look at the bottom line numbers and some of the policy issues in there, yeah, it's okay. It's actually not too bad.
So let's look at some of the surprises last night, particularly the tax cuts. Fairly small. Are they meaningful?
Look, they were a surprise. I don't think anybody had heard of or got wind of the fact that they were going to be raising that, lowering the tax threshold on the lowest bracket from 16 cents to 14 cents over a couple of years. They're not big bickies, they're not big dollar savings once they take effect from the middle of next year and the middle of the year after that. I think in total, a taxpayer will be saving about $15 to $20 a week. So in the scheme of where we're going to be in the economy in a year or two's time, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's one of those ones that if we had, tax bracket indexation, which a lot of people talk about, it's probably the extent of the indexation that we'd probably see if we had that. So look, it's just something there. It's a little sweet, and I think it's probably more to do with something else for the government to talk about as the election campaign starts to heat up and we get very close to election day. It's not a bad thing. It's not the sort of thing either that's going to blow inflation out of the water because it's such a big tax cut, but it's not the sort of thing either that's going to be sort of celebrated by everyone that it's, oh, wow, this is a game changer. But having said all that, I prefer lower taxes than higher taxes, so I'll take every little bit that I can get.
What about the healthcare changes? So hopefully the more money for GPs, hopefully meaning more bulk billing for people, the cost of a script will fall, all cost of living measures really.
Yeah, all cost of living measures. And they're the sort of items that a lot of people avoid going to the doctor, or they avoid getting their scripts filled because they do just cost that large amount of money. And when you're really on the edge of your financial status and you're feeling a bit crook, or gee, I've got this script to fill, but it's going to cost me $35 or whatever it is, and it's down to $25. Great. So again, it's the sort of things that were announced pre-budget, actually. And this is one of the things about the budget in general. And as you alluded to in the intro, Sean, that it was a budget that they didn't really think that they would deliver. So they announced a lot of stuff that they just sort of packaged together in the budget. So these health reforms, yeah, they're useful. Again, they're certainly helpful for, the marginal individual out there in terms of their GP visits and bulk billing rates and the prescription costs. Again, they're just a few bucks here, a few bucks there, but in a sense, once you add up all these things and you throw in things like childcare and whatnot, there's some pretty decent sort of cost of living relief measures there.
Okay. What about the deficit forecast? So $42.1 billion next financial year, coming in over $27 billion this financial year. Should we be worried about those things?
I would like to see smaller deficits at this stage of the business cycle, and particularly as the Treasurer is forecasting stronger economic growth, I think once we get out into financial year 26-27, so a couple of years from now. And so 2.5, 2.75 GDP growth, with inflation at 2.5, with the unemployment rate still at 4.25%, you would probably think the budget deficits may be a little bit smaller. But again, in the scheme of things, and given the size of the Australian economy now, we're close to a $3 trillion per annum economy. Budget spending and outlays are $800 billion per annum. So small forecasting errors can have a very big effect on the budget bottom line. This is not an excuse to say that the budget deficits don't matter. But when the economy is improving, and maybe maybe this is for the post-election budget. Whoever wins the election might just sort of deliver a few nasties to sort of get that structural balance of the budget in better shape. But again, we've only got budget deficits. They're only about 1.2, 1.3% of GDP. They're the sort of numbers that certainly haven't spooked the markets. And just as I was looking last night at the initial money market reactions to it, it was a big yawn. They didn't even move the dollar, the bond yields or anything didn't move in response to these tax cuts and other measures that were there. But, the US is going through agony right now trying to get their budget deficit down from 6% of GDP. The Doge tax cuts and other spending cuts that Mr. Musk is implementing is struggling to get their budget deficit to anywhere near ours. So, again, I think we just need to sort of take a step back. What do we want this budget to deliver, or any budget to deliver, be it from any treasurer? And at the end of the day, if the economy's growing, small budget deficit, there's a little bit of cost of living relief. It's not the worst thing that we've seen.
Stay with me, Stephen. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is economist Stephen Koukoulas. Before we went to the break, you kind of wrapped up the budget and there's a bit of cost of living relief and sort of around the edges. Should budgets be more reform documents?
Look, I think back in the day, and my grey hair tells me I used to be involved in the budget writing process many, many moons ago. And back in the day, if I can use that phrase, and before everybody says, "Okay, boomer," tell us your old war stories. But back in the day, they were bigger reforming documents. And I think in the era where there wasn't the 24-hour news cycle and these sorts of things, when the budget came along, everyone was there anxiously seeing what was in there. Hence, we had the lockups, and there would be many, many different headlines that came of it. Nowadays, as we just touched on, Sean, the Treasurer and the government's announced a lot of the things that were sort of packaged up in the budget well before budget night. We don't need to wait till this budget night for policy decisions to be announced. If you've got a good idea on the housing side, on childcare, on pharmaceutical payments, announce them when you've got them ready. Yeah. And of course, with the budget, it's sort of more, I think, an accounting document. So you bring together all the costs and changes to parameters and tax receipts and these sort of things. And that's a really important part of budgeting by definition. What is the accounting mechanism? How big is the surplus or the deficit? What is happening to government debt? How many bonds will the government need to issue to cover the budget deficit this year? And that's all really, really important stuff. But in terms of the policy reform, if you've got a good idea in government, announce it today, tomorrow. Don't wait for the budget to do it because people are hungry for economic news and economic policy change as well. So I think the budget's losing a lot, or has lost a lot of its luster. It's just not that sort of wow sort of document that it used to be.
What about in terms of this budget as a pre-election budget? It is obviously a pre-election budget because we have to have one by the middle of May, an election by the middle of May. How's it, like if we want to rate it in terms of that, there's always a temptation for government to go big ahead of the election. They didn't totally do that last night.
No, they didn't. Apart from the income tax cuts, which again we said were not huge in the scheme of throwing money around, if you like. But building on some of the other measures that have been announced previously, including the extension of the electricity subsidies for another 2 quarters and these sorts of things, there are things out there which are appealing but don't necessarily blow the budget out of the water. And again, I mentioned the money market reaction to the budget because, again, as we saw with various examples, I think back to Liz Truss in the UK a couple of years ago when she announced a whole lot of radical reforms, the markets absolutely tanked. We've got the budget coming out, and as I look at the markets, bond yields might be up or down a tick or two, and the Aussie dollar's sort of barely moved, and they're actually reacting more to US economic news than our own budget. So that says to me that whatever the pre-election posturing, if you like, of the government when it framed its budget, it's not the sort of thing that's going to, first of all, scare too many voters. But it's not necessarily the thing that people are going to say, gee, I'm going to get a whole lot of cash in my pocket, so I might vote for you. So, again, and that's where the Treasurer's tried to come out. I listened to him last night sort of saying, look, it's a prudent, responsible budget. And look, it broadly is. It broadly is. And as an economist, yes, I'd love to see more reform, but, I'd also like to open the batting for Australia, and I'm never going to do that either.
Just very quickly, Peter Dutton speaks on Thursday night, his budget reply. it's an opportunity for him to have a set piece, even if the general population doesn't necessarily watch him. Certainly the media watches him. Is he likely to say anything particularly around reform, around change, or do you think he'll play a pretty straight bat too?
Look, it's a great opportunity for him. And I love politics and I love the hustle and bustle of the political debate. So I'm really hoping that he does come out with the coalition's alternative policy, because that's what it's about. If they're all copying each other, then it's a bit of a yawn fest in a sense. So if I was Peter Dutton or advising him, I'd say, look, again, without super radical policies or something that's going to scare the horses, so to speak, it's a great chance for him to put a little bit of flesh on a couple of alternative policies. I don't know what they're going to be, but here's a chance for him to sort of set the groundwork for the election campaign. Maybe he does something a little bit different on the income tax scales. We know they've got a different strategy on renewable energy and these sorts of things. That's fine and that's important, and that's what we can have a debate about when the election campaigning hots up. But it is a chance for him to say, well, yeah, we would target a smaller budget deficit. We want a surplus, and this is how we're going to achieve it. I think it's how we achieve it that he's got to put a bit of flesh on the bone. And so I'll be watching it. I'm one of these suckers who'll watch it. And I just hope that it's an enlightening delivery that just sort of lifts the whole economic debate, because the Australian economy is pretty good, but like my old school reports, could be doing better.
Always, Stephen. Thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
Stephen Koukoulas, a.k.a. The Kouk. He's the Managing Director of Market Economics. You'll find him at thekouk.com, THEKOUK, thekouk.com, or on X using the handle The Kouk. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.